nation! No donation, no salvation!
And remember, respect is everything.
Alright, we are back. As I promised, I would do a tutorial on jet figures. So I've selected a few of my Seekers since they're, the most common type of jet figure that I build for this tutorial because, well, you see, if you are new here, none of my Seekers are the same. They're all different in their own way. Every single one of them has their own characteristics, their own specific type of build. So I'm not going to really do a, tutorial, but I'll kind of deconstruct the figures to give you an idea of how they're made and give you a general idea of what goes into building one of these. So because there are several different types of, body types for my Seekers, let's go ahead and get started and not waste too much time. I've selected a few here because I feel that I should cover at least, one of each, because the rest are all kind of duplicates of these body types. So it kind of adds variety. Like I said, this is mostly related to my Seekers, but this also can just apply to jet formers in general. I would have brought out the aerial bots for this, but they're all pretty much identical. And I mean, if you watch my aerial bots video when I did Superion, they're really not that complex, and they share a lot of, build techniques from these figures anyway. So let's stop rambling. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so we're going to start with our man here, Starscream. Since he's the leader of the Seekers, I feel he's the first we should start with. Now, one thing that you probably noticed already, my Transformers go for a very specific aesthetic. So as you can see, they have fairly large heads and very exaggerated proportions to some degree. That's because, so when I was a kid, I watched a lot of anime growing up, especially in high school. So naturally, a lot of it influenced the way I designed some of my characters. Not just Transformers, but just a lot of my artwork in general. So yes, the style I went for is very Mega Man-ish. To give you a good example of this aesthetic, let's move Starscream back a bit. Oop! I think I dropped something. Here's Cliff Jumper. So yeah, very stocky, very kind of, chibi. I don't really like using that word. Unlike the Carbots, though, a lot of my Carbots use fake chests because, it's to kind of keep with the style of them. A lot of the Jets, however, because they're much bigger characters, I can actually utilize more of their vehicle parts into the transformation. So Starscream's cockpit actually is his cockpit. A lot of my Transformers also use ball joints to a heavy degree because that's part of how I get a lot of expressions out of them. So, here are the most common types of ball joints that I use in these. As well as, sometimes I'll even use these ones. And a lot of the times, if I can fit them in, I will include hands. Starscream was literally the first jet former I ever built outside of Jetfire. So that's part of why he doesn't have hands. But a lot of my Transformers don't have hands, so that's to be expected, so... Now, in regards to Starscream's transformation, so, as you can see, I left some gaps here, because that's where his legs would go in jet mode. So because, even though he is wearing G1 Starscream colors, he's very inspired by the animated design of Starscream. So as you can see, the legs are very squared off, so they kind of just fit into those slots there. And like I said, very simple ball joint system. It's pretty much basically this. But there's an extension in the middle to kind of act as, the main thigh, and then right here would be the knees. So let's go ahead and just take that apart real quick to give you an idea of how that's put together. So, like I said, my jet formers are very basic. So yeah, if you can see, there's just one of those ball joints, and then I just use the hip extensions, and then I built the actual shins, and then the feet just kind of go on there. So... there's Starscream. Let's go ahead and put them back together before I take them apart too much. Now, in regards to stowing away the head, now this is where the Jets kind of have an advantage. So the head, I usually try to disguise it as part of the Jet, so I'll include a color match piece like this. So So let's go ahead and take his head off. I usually include some kind of color match piece to go with the lines of the jet, kind of make it, less noticeable. So it just kind of blends in. Now, because this particular version of Starscream is based on the animated one, which apparently the actual jet mode that he was based on is based on some kind of Russian jet. I don't remember the name of that jet, so I'll have it on screen. You do have to remove his null rays, though, so that is one thing to keep in mind. Now, because his arms... So let's go ahead and take the arms out. So here's the actual wing assembly. I could have made this rotate if I really wanted to for a more, I guess, normal jet look. But because I like that backwards wing look of the Russian jet that Starscream was modeled after, I just left the wings as is. So they just kind of sit like that. And then his arms actually become the tail fins of the jet. So that's part of the reason his arms are the way they are. And why he doesn't have hands, because, like I said, it would screw with the aesthetic of the jet. And he would literally just have these giant hands sticking out here. I'm sure I probably could have hid them somehow, but that's up to whether I want to update this figure or not. So yeah, in jet mode they're intentionally backwards. And let's go ahead and take a look at the arm. The arms are pretty much exactly the same as the legs. Just you got your ball joint, and then you have your socket, and then there's a little in-between piece that kind of acts as the main, I guess, not forearm, but I guess the main bicep, if that makes sense. I think I'm using that terminology correctly. And then, so it's a very basic structural skeleton. So Starscream is very simplistic, but he has a lot of character in him, and I'm, very happy with him. So let's go ahead and move on to a more complex character. Okay, so here's Acid Storm. As you can see, he uses a more, what I call my bruiser body type, where he's a lot wider in the chest, a little stockier, kind of a very bodybuilder type aesthetic to him. So let's go ahead and get him out of that pose that he's in so you can get an idea of what that's supposed to look like. Like I said, a lot of them have removable null rays, which I don't mind. I mean, they're weapons, so it doesn't bother me as much. But yes, Acid Storm here uses a very, very large mid-torso area. He has no real waist articulation because of this, but like I said, these are very bruiser-esque proportions, which was the kind of the idea behind this. A few of my Seekers use this body type. And Acid Storm is one of them. Although in my store, he's actually one of the smarter bruisers, since, he's basically a scientist, but with a bruiser body type. He's more or less the same as Starscream in regards to his legs. They just kind of fold in back here, and then fit wherever I can get them to fit. So yeah, they'll usually just sit somewhere like right there. So like I said, you got your in-between piece and you got your ball joint. So let's go ahead and take them apart real quick so you can get an idea of how that's supposed to work. There we go. So yeah, the legs are very similar construction to Starscream's. In fact, they're pretty much identical aside from the thruster that I stuck on the back of his leg. So yeah, there's a basic construction of how that's worked. Basically, so you got your socket, your actual limb piece, and then there's the ball joint, and then you just kind of build off of it. Let's go ahead and get him put back together. Goodness, I just ripped apart Acid Storm. There's Acid Storm, and like I said, his transformation is pretty much identical. Only his tail fins are made from his actual helmet, since they all have very different style helmets, to a degree, of course. So let's move on to the next character, who actually will be a lot more complex. So we're going to look at Sunstorm. Now this is one of my more intricate Seekers. He's much slender, more, I guess, thinner. He also is one of the few Seekers to use this kind of high heel design that I kind of gave him. So, like I said, he has a much slender build. That same piece that I used for the, the main bicep, because then you got your forearm, your bicep, and then your shoulders. I decided to use that for the waist. The reason I did this is because he turns into a very different style of jet. So let me go ahead and just get him into jet mode. For the cockpit on him, so his cockpit actually folds back. It's not really meant to be the chest. The chest is kind of its own design. And then the actual hips use this three-way ball joint. So let me get let's go and get a good look at that. So I'm going to rip them in half here. So yes, the hips use a three-way ball joint for most of the articulation. So he actually has waist articulation. And then there's his foot, which is a very simple design. So if you want to try and replicate that high heel look, you can go ahead and do that. So yeah, I do use this piece twice since he has actual feet. For his particular design. His design is somewhat inspired by Jetfire from the animated series, but in a Decepticon format, which is ironic because if I remember correctly, Jetfire and Jetstorm in animated were, I think they were inspired by, what were those two guys from Teen Titans? One of them was like ice and one was fire. I don't remember their names, but I will probably edit it in post-production. But yeah, similar head design, only his, instead of a black helmet like most traditional Seekers, I gave his some color, you know, sunrise colors basically. For the actual cockpit, it basically folds over, and how this is accomplished is with a series of hinges. So they all just kind of interlink together. Very simplistic hinge design, but it works and gets the job done. And the actual cockpit is just, you know, very basic bricks that you can get a hold of at any real set. So go ahead and fold those down. The wings are a different story. Now the wings also use the same kind of clips to kind of hold them in place. And then I believe... okay, I remember now. Okay, it's all coming back to me. Now, the reason his legs are the way they are is because when they fold back, they fold over this glass canopy. I don't know why I put that there. I guess it's just because I like the look of it. I'm not quite sure why I did that, but yes, that glass canopy will basically act as the top of the jet. And then as for his arms, they just kind of fold back. His null rays do not need to be detached. They basically act as thrusters for the jet mode. I'm trying my best to explain these things as simplistically as possible so that anyone can understand this. So, yeah, not much deconstruction goes into this one. I kind of went for a more slender design with him, so that's part of the reason he looks the way he does. Like I said, all my Seekers, I intentionally make them different, but they're all inspired by different interpretations of the characters that have appeared over the years. With a more inspired, I guess, for source material, if that makes sense. So, it is what it is. So there's Sunstorm. So yes, this is one of my Rainmakers who pretty much uses a very similar build to Starscream, but since he is a Tetrajet, instead of having giant wings to form the Tetrajet, his arms pretty much become the sides of the Tetrajet. So basically, again, same arm design, except they fold up and actually become the sides of the Tetrajet. And then you fold them around like that, and then they pretty much you would have to fold his wrist around just so that it kind of blends in with the the back of the thing. So yes, his actual side, his whole arm becomes the side of the Tetrajet. He does still have wings, like a Seeker should, only they're pretty much hooked on to the back. They don't really do anything. They're kind of pointless on this character since his whole arm becomes the side of the jet. But I included them anyway just to give it, some presence to it, just so that he at least kind of resembles a Seeker. So yeah, like I said, for these arms, I mean, again, very simplistic build. It's just a standard ball joint and socket, and then you just build around it. So, like I said, with this one, it was all about getting the shape right. So, you obviously want it to, be flush so that when he goes into jet mode, it actually looks flush. So, since we're going to go ahead and transform him, give you an idea of what the jet mode is supposed to look like, I figure this will help out a lot for anyone trying to build their own Tetrajet. So, and then the head, like I said, just kind of becomes part of the bodywork with these Seekers. So yeah, he's more or less a Tetrajet, almost, just with these extenders, these little wings, I guess. I actually used a similar design on my Armada Starscream that I built, or at least the colors are Armada Starscream inspired. So obviously his is not as clean, but like I said, it's one of my older figures. So next we're going to look at Blackout, who's basically a reverse Sunstorm in a more traditional style of jet transformation, that is. So as you can see, most of the jet makes up his body, which is how it normally should be. However, the difference here is that his legs actually do fold back to make the remainder of the jet. So to give you an idea of how that works, so yeah, his actual waist clips into the top right there, and then the waist itself is just made from a series of hinges that are pretty common in pretty much every Lego set, at least, you know, that require moving parts. This is very similar to my Jetfire figure, only the Jetfire figure I made uses a lot of Technic bricks. So speaking of which, let me go get him. Okay, since we decided to bring out Jetfire, let me demonstrate what I was talking about in regards to those Technic bricks. So, like I said, I used a lot of Technic bricks here, mostly for the backpack. So the actual backpack does clip into place. So, and it also makes up a good half of the jet. Since, you know, I decided to go for the more classic / universe Jetfire look. You can't really see that. So, like I said, you know, his head pretty much disguises as part of the jet, and then the actual backpack here pretty much is held on with Technic bricks. It is detachable, but there's really no point for it to be because the other half of the jet is on here. But if you wanted a cleaner look, you know, there it is. So here's kind of the working system of how that whole backpack assembly kind of folds up and goes over his head to basically pretty much you know, cover the actual head, and then the actual rear here, which is held on with the backpack, so it would clip in right there, is just basically just some Technic joints. So again, I don't want to completely deconstruct him because you know, he's a pretty complex figure with how he's built. Again, this can be accomplished in many different ways. This is just one of the ways I chose to do it. As for the actual legs, they're attached to a ball joint, which also has a clip to it, so that it can attach to the Technic pieces. So that's how that jet transformation kind of works. So you can fold his legs back and basically, you know, form the bottom of the jet. Like I said, with jets, you're going to have a lot of undercarriage, but that's to be expected. It's just the backpack pretty much folds down to hold the legs in place. And then the rest is history. Because Jetfire's arms also form part of the wings, you know, when transforming him, basically it would, like I said, my figures are very basic. So a lot of the vehicle mode is pretty much incorporated into their limbs, which is pretty much how I understand how a Transformer is supposed to be. So, like I said, his arms pretty much become the rear tail fins of the jet. And then I think they're supposed to fold back. Like I said, if you've seen the review, you've already seen the transformation. This is just kind of a general deconstruction of how these figures are made. Like I said, it would be difficult for me to go into detail for every single one of them. Mostly because they're all so different, even though they use a general template that's pretty much identical. So Blackout uses a very similar design, it's just hinges instead of Technic bricks. So, like I said, very simple way of building it. Really, the most complicated parts of these figures is just getting enough of the ball joints for the basics of the articulation. But yeah, his vehicle mode basically just folds back like this, and then pretty much assembles the rear of the jet. So the rear of the jet ends up lining up with his helmet, so it can kind of, you know, just blend in. For the actual wings, they're mounted to the shoulders instead, so they're not required to be on the back. Again, this is how I designed them, because I wanted them to look a specific way. And then as for the arms, they just kind of hang out in the back. I've already looked at this figure before, so naturally, you know, there's not much to go into in regards to the transformation. So really, the transformations are very simplistic. They're just accomplished with very simple engineering, but uses a lot of parts to accomplish that engineering. So go ahead and plug his legs back in. But yeah, his head pretty much just blends into the jet, which is pretty much how a lot of these jet figures I build work, especially my Seekers. So go ahead and fold his shoulder pads back down. So again, the legs, it's pretty much the same thing. You got your ball joint, your hip, and then, you know, your shins. Or I guess that would be a thigh. I don't know. I'm not good with anatomy. I mean, this is coming from a guy who watches way too much anime. For the next Seeker type that I do is the cone heads. Now, unfortunately, the cone heads, I'll be honest, are very, very simple. They don't really, I mean, they do kind of transform. Because their head is made from the cockpit, it pretty much simplifies a lot of the transformation. So it's literally just, you know, rotate this, and then you're done. So yeah, the cone heads are definitely the weakest of my Seekers. Mostly because the way their heads are designed eliminates a lot of the, I guess, required engineering for, you know, my Transformers. So then you just, so yeah, the null rays would have to be removed and then flipped around. So again, I try not to parts form, but because they're weapons, I can let it go. So that's the only reason it doesn't bother me as much in regards to the parts forming. But yeah, they're jet modes. The cone heads have always been my weakest Seekers. So that's part of the reason I don't focus on them too much. Since, you know, ironically, the way they're designed and the aesthetic I go for actually eliminated a lot of the transformation element. These figures are more an aesthetic rather than functional, proper Transformers. So let's go ahead and move on to the last type of Seeker that I built and jet formers so that, you know, I can finally finish this video off. Okay, so next we're going to look at Slipstream, one of the few fembots that I've built that is a flyer. The only other ones I've done was Windblade, and then every other fembot I've done was either a car or some kind of motorcycle vehicle like Chromia. For Slipstream, things get a little more complicated because she uses a lot of ball joints. So right here in the shoulders, she uses a three-way ball joint which connects to the main body, the bicep, and then the actual wings because of how she's designed. There is a lot of curvature pieces to kind of, I guess, capture that sort of feminine shape. So her thighs are a good example of this. You know, the only time it does break the sculpt is when the knees are used. But I mean, most of the time, I mean, you don't really notice it. As for these feet, I don't know where you would find these, because these are from an old Hero Factory set, and I just happen to have both of them. But they just clip into that little hole there, and then, I mean, that's pretty much the feet. The actual leg itself, I guess I'll look at it real quick, since there's a lot of intricate parts that go into to kind of capture that feminine shape of, you know, wider hips and stuff like she has in a lot of her depictions. I just use a lot of these wedge pieces, and then I just kind of build it off of these like slightly less wedge pieces, and then a lot of trial and error goes into capturing the shape, especially when it comes to a female figure, because, you know, women come in many shapes and sizes, and, you know, capturing their figure just right, you know, depending on, you know, how they're supposed to look, can be a bit of a challenge. Her cockpit actually is very similar to Sunstorm's, but it's flipped. So instead, it's down here, kind of where her butt is. Trying my best not to be dirty here. So, oh my god, that's a whole new definition of cockpit. But anyway, her legs are probably the most complicated piece of this transformation. Mostly because of how I had to engineer them to work with the actual jet mode. So, like I said, a lot of these jet figures, you know, their undercarriage is rather god tier. So, like I said, they all use the same general construction. It's just a matter of how you utilize it. So, I mean, the main torso here, here's pretty much how that arm is constructed. To give you a general idea of what that's supposed to look like. It's just a three-way ball joint. And then, you know, the wing, arm, and shoulder, they all kind of feed into the same piece. And then you just kind of get that to... Again, I'm sorry if I'm not explaining this very well. It's just... That's part of the issue why I was so hesitant to do instructions in the first place. I wouldn't really say instructions, but just deconstruction videos of how these figures are more or less put together. I'm trying my best here. That's pretty much it. Go ahead and just put her back into to robot mode, which is literally just her, I guess, sitting on her own face. I don't know how to really describe it. They're not complex figures. They're just very simplistic, mostly because of the aesthetic that I go for. As you can see, she's very stocky, but that's kind of the point. But anyway, I hope this helped to some degree and give you an idea of how I make these figures. I'm sorry that I can't completely deconstruct them and show you how to build every single one of them, mostly because most of them are very similar anyway and just use very simplistic templates, so pretty much just trial and error. That's all I can really say. Anyway, I hope you've all enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next one.
Hallelujah! Another soul saved!